Hello, and welcome to Christ Church of Fort Thomas, Kentucky. We are a congregation that is covenanted with the United Church of Christ, and our guiding statement here is that we embrace all as we journey the way of Jesus. So wherever you are in your life journey or your faith journey, you're welcome here, and we want you to be able to belong here as well. Belonging is really going to be at the heart of the message that we're going to look at today around boldness. From the book of Ruth in the Hebrew Scriptures. And speaking of belonging, we are in next couple weeks going to be having our next new members opportunity to learn what it means to covenant as a member of Christ Church. So if you're interested in that, whether you're a person who's often here in the pews on a Sunday morning or whether you're just connecting in this way, we'd love to have you be a part of that. And so if you're interested, please let me know. And actually, what I'm here because where I'm standing today, rather than the front of the sanctuary, but instead out here, is because we are going to be talking about what it means to belong in the story of Ruth today. And so I wanted to have this visual of the places that, you know, when you're a part of this church, often these are the places that you find yourself. And so that's kind of where I am, why I am where I am today. Two other things about what's coming up in the life of the church. First of all, the first Sunday of March is our congregational meeting, annual thing that we do, some of the business work of the church that we have to do together, and so that will be right after the worship service. Right now, it's not looking like we will have an electronic component or an online component to that, so if you want to be a part of that, it is one that you would need to be in person for that. It will take place right after the worship service. And then the next thing is, next Sunday, I'm going to be sharing about something really exciting coming up that we're going to do on the last Sunday of March. And so I wanted to just kind of plant that seed for you of something that I don't know this church has ever done before, but something that's going to be pretty great. So anyways, that'll be coming up on March 30th. Watch for more next week. So again, welcome wherever you might be in your life journey or your faith journey. We're grateful you're with us today. So we are continuing our look at stories about boldness in the Scriptures, and today's story is actually around the entirety of a whole book. Excuse me, the entirety of a whole book, the book of Ruth, and we're going to read the passage in just a second. But I want to encourage you, we're only going to read one part of it, but I would encourage you to take some time and maybe even do it right now, to just pause the video and read the entirety of the book. It's only 4 chapters, it's only 80 verses. It's not a lengthy read by any means, but we're going to be really looking at the whole of the book together. Before we read it, just a little bit about the book. So the book of Ruth is a book that, so if I came up with a list of maybe the top 5 books in the Bible that don't really seem to fit with the rest, Ruth would be on it. Because Ruth is not a big story of, you know, nations and peoples and powerful miracles that God does. The book of Ruth is a short book that is basically a family drama. That's really the crux of the book of Ruth. It is a story of a couple generations of a family. It's a story of famine. It's a story of love. It's a story of loss. It's really a family drama. And the story as well, God really is at best a background character. God really, there's no message of God speaking in the story. The only references to God are things that might, you know, equivalent today would be someone saying to another person, well, you know, I hope God blesses what you've got coming ahead. Like that's the extent of the presence, the outward or the explicit presence of God. There's no really miraculous things or miracles that happen. But we are going to look at some things in the story that might seem miraculous and some bold actions taken. So it is a bit of an unusual book. And in our series that we're looking at about boldness, it's going to be a bit unusual about how we engage this story and who we talk about of boldness with this story. So just wanted to introduce with that. And so our reading today comes from the book of Ruth. We're going to read the first 18 verses of chapter 1. But before we do that, let us pray once again the prayer that we've been lifting up these last several weeks from the book of Acts. And now, Lord, grant to your servants to speak, to listen, and to live your word with all boldness, while you stretch out your hand to heal, and signs and wonders are performed through the name of your holy servant, Jesus. Amen. So, Ruth chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man in Bethlehem in Judea went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and their 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the other was Ruth. And when they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. And then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. And so she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And the Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband." And then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has been turned against me." And then they wept aloud again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So let's walk through the story a little bit. So our story starts out with a very brief description of this family of the people of the tribe of Ephraim, living in Bethlehem in ancient Judah in the time of the judges. So when you look at the books of the Hebrew scriptures, you see the first 5 books, and then you've got Joshua, the entry of the people into the promised land, and then you got the book of Judges when they ruled this new land. And so somewhere in the middle of that book comes this story that we call the book of Ruth, but is actually a story of quite a few more people than just Ruth. But our story starts with this family, Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And a famine happens, and we see a story that's been told countless times before and is still lived out time and time and time again today. When a group of people are fleeing a place where they no longer have the opportunity to live, whether it's because of violence or because of famine or disease or disaster or whatever, and they flee where they have been, what they've always known, to go to a place hoping that they will be received and they can begin a new life. So this is a book that starts with essentially the story of refugees. Elimelech, Naomi, and their 2 sons. And they travel from ancient Bethlehem Yep, same Bethlehem as the birth of Jesus story. And they travel to a region called Moab, which would, depending on exactly where they were in there, would be anywhere from 60 to 70 miles north, or maybe more like 100 to 150 miles north. It would be in modern-day Syria today compared to modern-day Israel and Palestine. So they travel there. This is not an easy journey. Okay, remember that it couldn't get in a car and be there in 2 hours. This is multiple days traveling with whatever it is they were able to take with them. This is not an easy journey. Without knowledge or without assurance that where they're going to get, that they will be received even, right? Because here's an important part that isn't really made clear in the story, but the Moabites and the Israelites did not like each other. Throughout the book of Judges, there are plenty of stories of the Moabites and the Israelites at war with each other. And there are stories of both sides doing horrific things to one another. They did not like each other. And so you have this family of the Israelite people going from Bethlehem, going to Moab, to a nation of their enemies, hoping they will find welcome. And so it is a bold decision that they make, but the boldness is something else that we're going to look at here, which is something miraculous happens here, and then something also similarly miraculous happens later on in the book of Ruth. But here, it is that, yes, they are not only welcomed in, but over the course of a decade, they not only get welcomed, but they belong. They become a part of that community. And how do we know that? We know that because of what happens with Elimelech and Naomi's sons. It says that they were given, or they took wives, depending on how it gets translated, of Moabite wives. Now, full disclosure, this is a very different time than what we have in culture from what we have today, right? Marriages were not marriages out of romance and attraction and so forth. Marriages were essentially arranged and contracts, and in many ways, a daughter was given as property from the father to the future husband, right? But even with that, that arrangement wouldn't be struck with somebody you didn't like or didn't trust. And so the fact that these two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, are taking or being given Moabite women for their wives is saying that they have become a part of that community. They belong there. And so that's kind of the first miraculous thing that I see here, is that somehow, some way, those Moabites were able to see those Israelites as people worthy of coming together with. Now, we don't know any of the story about what happened in those 10 years, other than the fact that in those 10 years, tragedy strikes. Elimelech dies. We don't know how, we don't know why. We just know that he dies. So Naomi becomes a widow. And then we read that those two sons also die. And so Naomi is not only grieving her husband, but now she's grieving the loss of both of her children. And Orpah and Ruth are also now widows. So they are now faced with a reality of living as widows in a time where widows really didn't have much possibility of care, of support, of a life. And so, yes, there's this first miraculous type of thing that happens, of the care and the compassion and welcome of the Moabite people for these Israelite refugees, that they are brought in and they become a part of it, become a part of that community. So there's that. But now Naomi is faced with a choice. She can continue to be in this land where she's lost her husband, she's lost both her sons, or she can go back to where she came from. And that's her decision. She makes the choice, as we read and as we heard in the story, to go back to Bethlehem. And initially, it sounds like she's having Orpah and Ruth come along with her. But shortly thereafter, she makes the decision to say to both of them, return home. Return home to your husband's fathers, to your people. That is where your home is. It's no longer Naomi's. For Naomi, there's nothing left for her there. And so she tries to send them back. And Orpah makes the decision to go. We read about how she blesses Naomi, she kisses her, and then apparently goes back. She's not begrudged for it. There's no that she abandoned Naomi or anything else like that. She goes back to her people. But Ruth makes a bold decision herself to say, no, I am not going to leave you. And here, just a little bit of a side note. What we get in the very end of our reading is one of the passages in the Bible that is, in my opinion, one of the ones that is used more out of context than maybe any other. I have seen these verses from Ruth chapter 1, 16 to 18 as things where couples say they want to use it as their wedding vows, or it's on wedding cards. And in fact, just full disclosure, I remember writing it on a Valentine's Day card that I gave to a girlfriend back in high school at one point. Okay? That on its own, you take it out of the rest of the story. Yeah, it sounds like this beautiful message of commitment of one person to another, maybe within a marriage. But that's not the context of this at all. It is women who are in deep grief over their losses, facing major decisions about where they're going to live out the rest of their lives. And it's Ruth saying, I am making the choice, Naomi, to never leave your side. She makes a bold choice. She absolutely does. And so Naomi and Ruth go off. Orpah returns back to Moab. Now, the rest of the book, the remaining 3 chapters of Ruth, which again I encourage you to read on your own, you see something very similar to what happened at the beginning. And so Naomi returns to Bethlehem. She returns to her family. They recognize her. They do welcome her back, although with a little bit of trepidation, to be perfectly honest, as you read what happens. But the majority of the rest of the story is about Ruth and a relationship that springs up with a man named Boaz, a man of Bethlehem, a man of the same tribe of Naomi and Elimelech. And what you see is this relationship begin to form, and that Ruth becomes a part of the community as well. It's not that Naomi is welcomed back and Ruth is sort of begrudgingly brought in like, oh, I guess we'll have her along as well, another one of those Moabite people. Maybe that was where it was at the start. I don't know. But Boaz sees her and marries her. And she becomes a part. She begins to belong. And so this family drama, you have another miraculous thing. That just as the Moabites welcomed in and allowed to belong these Israelite refugees, so Boaz and others, as Israelites, welcome in this grieving young widow. And the story ends. And maybe this is why this story stayed in the Bible. Because it tells how the children, the descendants of Boaz and Ruth, that the line follows down and eventually comes to a man named Jesse, who is the father of many children, but in particular one named David, who would be chosen to be the future king of the nation. And from David, kind of like we looked at the story of Rahab a few weeks ago, from David you trace his descendants down, and eventually you come to a man named Jesus. And so these bold actions of belonging, so to speak, of mercy, of compassion, of welcome, that allow Elimelech and his family to belong within the nation of Moab. And then in return, how Ruth is welcomed in with compassion and love and allowed to belong within the nation of Judah or of Israel. That those bold acts of compassion and mercy and love and belonging still ripple down to us today. And so I want to offer this story to you as an encouragement and as a challenge to the ways in which we live out actions of bold compassion and mercy and love that leads to belonging. We see it in the story of Ruth. You see it over and over again in the story of Jesus. This call of who we are to be in this world today, because we don't know. We don't know what that action of mercy and compassion and love and welcome that leads to belonging, we don't know where eventually that will lead. But we do know that that is the model that God gives to you and to me, to us as the church of Jesus Christ. Grace, peace, love, and joy be with you today and every day. Amen.